Okay, so today's video is going to be about the first episode from the back half of Season 8 of Fear the Walking Dead, which is its final season. Just a few housekeeping things before I get started. I'm probably not going to have as many screenshots in this video because I had a little bit of a technology tantrum today, and it's working now, but I'm just not going to quite do as many screenshots. It just won't be as specific on the pictures. And like I said before, there's a lot less in Fear the Walking Dead. I don't know. It depends on the episode, and I'm sure there will be some things that I can talk about for a long time, but don't be surprised if these videos are a little bit shorter than the Daryl Dixon ones. There was just a ton in Daryl Dixon. So the other thing is, if you have never watched Fear, I know a lot of people do not watch the spinoffs, you're going to be a little bit lost as to what is going on. So I will do my best to give you background information. But especially with characters like Strand, who this episode was about, he's been on it since the very beginning of Fear the Walking Dead, which means you're missing 8 seasons of history with him. And obviously, I'm not going to be able to go through all of that. So I guess if anything I say doesn't make sense, it might be one of those things where it makes sense to me because I've watched it from the beginning and I didn't give you enough background for it to make sense to you. If that happens, somebody just write in and tell me and I will clarify it in the next video, okay? All right, so this episode was all about Strand, and for a little bit of background, last season, the group got really split up and Strand basically started his own community in a really tall tower, and there were just 1,000,001 parallels to Grady in that tower. And the hospital, of course, was a tower as well. But Strand really became kind of a dictator. He's someone who's very much an anti-hero, and he goes back and forth, waffles back and forth a lot about whether he actually is a good guy or a bad guy. I think at his core, he's a good guy, but he just gets his morals crossed quite often. You know, we've seen characters like that before. So after the tower went down, they all got onto rafts, and then season 8 started, I don't even remember how many years later, 5, 6, 7 years later. And we think they did that time jump in order to bring the narrative of Fear concurrent with the flagship show, especially because at the end of the first half of the season, Morgan is actually heading toward Alexandria again. So obviously it needs to be in present day. So where we are with Strand is that he has joined another community. He has basically a husband and a son who is not his biologically, obviously. But he's been there for quite a few years and he's established himself there. He goes by the name Anton, which is not his real name, and they're all speaking German at the beginning, which I thought was kind of an interesting choice. I wonder if it's a nod to the, Europe storyline in general. I don't know. So the thing that struck me most about this community is that it is very much like the prison was in season 4 as we started out. It's a thriving community. There's a lot of people there. They're good people. They're working together to keep this place up. And it just, there's even a bus here. Remember there was the school bus at the prison. Just a lot of things that reminded me a lot of the prison. But in a good way, in the sense that it is actually a really good community. While he's there, not too long after we see Strand, well, actually, before I get to that, Strand is wearing a yellow vest. And I don't know that he's really worn yellow before, so of course it immediately reminded me of Beth and her yellow polo. And there's a few different ways we could go with this. I think Strand could be Beth. I also think he could be Daryl in terms of the parallel going on there. But I'll get more into that as we go along. So pretty near the beginning of the episode, he's told that there is a new person who has come in, and it's a woman, and that she is having basically a medical emergency and needs medical help. And when he goes in to see who it is, it's Madison. Now, Strand and Madison have always actually been pretty close friends. They've been back and forth. They've certainly had their times when they've disagreed with one another, but they have a really long history. So it's actually a pretty big reunion for them to see each other again. He was under the impression she was dead, and then when she sees him, she says that she was under the impression that he was dead. So you can see that there could be parallels here to a reunion with Beth and Daryl. Now, in terms of Madison, my first thought is that she definitely could be Beth, and as we go along throughout the episodes, there's a lot more parallels to her and Beth. In this case, if she were, it would be a matter of Beth being brought into a community. So I'm just going to put this out there as conjecture. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of evidence for it, but my mind immediately starts going to headcanons and trying to figure out how this could play out in the future with Beth and Daryl. If it were to play out with them, I'm wondering possibly if in France, assuming that Daryl goes back to the nest with Laurent after, episode 6 of season 1 in order to take Laurent back, if Beth could be brought into the community, and that's how he finds her again. as someone who's injured. And then, this could be a parallel to that. But again, that's just me conjecturing. I have no idea if that's going to happen at all. The other thing is that it reminded me a lot of Carol being brought in to Grady. We have a woman who is brought in, who someone who's already there knows, and she's injured when she comes in and needs medical attention. So that could be another parallel there. Strand immediately denies who he is. He doesn't want to use his name. He tells the others he doesn't know Madison. And I don't know, it's very much about his identity and being truthful about who you are. But I also wondered if this could be a parallel to Beth's supposed memory loss. We've gone back and forth about whether she'll have memory loss or not. Overall, I don't think it'll be a huge part of the story. I can see her having mild memory loss after she was shot, but I kind of think that by the time we see her again, it will be mostly resolved, or if it's not, it'll be resolved in an episode or two, because I just can't see them doing this huge arc for a full season where she has no memory. I just don't think that would serve the show very well. That doesn't mean that it won't be a thing that she went through at some point, so Strand refusing to acknowledge who he is might be a parallel to that, but we don't even know for sure that Beth's going to have memory loss. So again, we're just kind of conjecturing and batting around ideas here. There's a lot of people talking on the walkie-talkie or on the radio that we see. The rest of Madison's group, which includes Daniel and June and Sherry, who was Dwight's wife, they're looking for her. And so we kind of hear them long distance over the radio. We don't see them until the end. The communication theme is definitely there. The kid that Strand calls his son, whose name is Klaus, ends up leaving with Madison. She basically takes him and they leave. Madison has taken children before, and the fact that she's doing that feels like a loose parallel to Beth because we've seen so much child and baby symbolism around her. So when Madison came back, that's what she was doing. She was basically kidnapping children, especially babies, and taking them to a place called Padre, which was not a good thing. I mean, that was not a heroic thing at all. That was really bad. But she sort of repented of that and decided to do something different. And now she's being all good again, and she's trying to make up for the families she kind of broke apart. And she's trying to find the parents of these kids if they're still alive. So her taking him wasn't terribly shocking, but what happens is some bad people come looking for Madison, and she's also kind of running from them. So the next thing that really jumped out at me is they end up in a library. So when Madison leaves, she takes a map, which, there's a lot of symbolism going on throughout, but they're mostly small symbols. Like a map is a big symbol. We've seen it around Daryl a lot. The school bus is a big symbol. Anyway, so Madison leaves with Klaus, and because she took the map, Strand has a pretty good idea where she's going. And he and his current husband, whose name is Frank, I believe, go looking for them, and they end up at this library. Now, it's probably because I just did the missing 17 days video, but when it showed this picture of the library, I felt like it looked like the white church, and I wondered if they could be synonymous symbols in some way, but I wasn't sure. It was just kind of a fleeting thought that I had. And then the next thing we see when they go inside is that Madison is inside, but she's hurt again. So Madison has this problem with her lungs where she needs oxygen all the time. And because she didn't have any, she ran out. She'd actually passed out from lack of oxygen. But Strand gets her some, and she ends up being okay. But still, we've got an injured blonde woman inside this library. Now, here's the thing about the library symbol. We have seen it a couple of times, more than a couple, but throughout the Walking Dead universe, but we don't see it very often. It's not a really, really dominant symbol. So I started talking with my fellow theorists about the times we've seen it. The ones that came to mind for me were in the final episode of season 6, we see that the Saviors were hunting a group who they called the Librarians. And we didn't actually necessarily see the place where they stayed, unless the place was where Carol ended up. There was some suggestion that it might have been. But they just called these people the Librarians. And Negan killed one of them in particular and hung him from an overpass, and there was a huge X painted on his chest. And a lot of that, especially the X, is a major Beth symbol. So we weren't really sure what to make of that. It was a little strange, and we thought maybe we would hear more about this group eventually, but we never did. It was just odd. And the Librarians is a really specific name to give them, But that's also where Carol takes off, or she did right before that. And in the next season, in 701, she finally gets to the kingdom and meets Ezekiel, but she's hurt first, and Morgan's looking for her. And they end up in a book place. I don't know if it's a library. I think it is. But either way, it's a place of books. The other one that came to me was in Self-Help, which is 505, Abraham's team heading to D.C., after the white bus has a massive mishap. They go into what I believe is a bookstore, so it's still a place of books. And what I started to realize is that all of these places have someone who's injured who goes into them, right? So, like I said, when Carol and Morgan went there, she was injured pretty bad because she had met those saviors on the road. Like I said, with the season 6 ones, we didn't necessarily see their place of... if they stayed in a library, but again, it might have been where Carol went, the implication is there. And then in the bookstore, Abraham's hand was hurt, and of course the bus had crashed, so all of them were a little bit hurt. And so I started talking to my fellow theorists, and they actually came up with some other ideas that I had forgotten for libraries. Okay, so one of them said, the most memorable library to me is in 10.8, The World Before. They make a stop over at a library in a town I can't remember the name of so that Luke can find some books to bring back to Alexandria. It's the episode where he whistles the 18th variation of Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, and it's where we first see Virgil, who saves Luke from a walker or that was hiding in the bookshelf. She also says libraries, funeral homes, and museums may have something in common, like tombs to the past. And then W.D. Way said there's also a library in, I believe, season 4 or 5 of Fear the Walking Dead. Nick and his girlfriend went in, and there was a lot of visual clues, clock, poster of Lincoln, X's on the bookshelves, etc. So I asked them because I do remember the one from 10.8. It's Michonne and Luke and Judith were all there. And so I do vaguely remember that. I believe that's where she picked up the book about Avalon, and that was a big symbol. But anyway, I asked them if in both of those cases somebody was injured who went into the library, and the answer was yes. So, I mean, it still could be that it's a parallel symbol to the white church, because again, we don't really know until we find out about the missing 17 days, but if Beth did go there after being shot, then it could represent some sort of convalescence for someone who's injured. But having a library or a place of books is a very specific choice, so I wonder if it represents some sort of knowledge she has that people need, either of the past or of the future. Anyway, so it's really interesting, and obviously we haven't nailed it down. I'm kind of going back and forth about things, but I thought it was a really, really interesting symbol, and we, obviously we've only seen it a handful of times, like maybe 4 or 5 times, so they don't use it often, but they do use it. So back to Fear the Walking Dead. Eventually Strand sends Frank and Klaus home, and he tries to help Madison. She wakes up and they try to leave, but the bad guys show up, and they end up running back into the library and get stuck there. But the bad guys come in and kill the walkers and basically take them hostage and take them back to the hotel, which is where Strand's community is. When they get there, they find out that these bad guys are led by Troy. So I will say that we didn't really have very much of Troy in this episode. It wasn't too much more than the pictures that were leaked of his return. However, there's not a blonde hair in sight, so that's important to remember. If you've forgotten, the coda, which is supposed to be Troy, had some blonde hair that is completely inexplicable because the character does not have blonde hair. He did not show up sporting a blonde wig, nothing like that. W.D. Way also noticed that in this episode, there's a part where Troy kind of wraps an arm around Strand's neck because he's threatening to kill him. And he has a huge scar on his hand, and we actually don't see that scar in that coda. So it still does suggest that that is not Troy, that it's somebody else. However, on the flip side, it did show part of that in the recap, and usually the things they show in the recap are going to be directly applicable to what happens in this episode. And then there's the fact that that person picked up Alicia's mummified arm, and Troy did have that when he showed up. So the whole thing is just really weird still. Very, very weird. Overall, I do think that it is meant to be Troy in that coda, but they just slipped the blonde hair in there as maybe some sort of clue to Beth's return or something, because he clearly is a returning character. He's a serious character. He's missing the one eye, or at least seems to be blind in that eye. Anyway, at this point, I actually felt like Troy was sort of a callback to the governor, because he tells them that he's going to take their home. Like, this is your home, you took my home, so now I'm going to take your home. And it just felt very much like the governor telling Rick and everybody at the prison that they had to leave and he was going to live there. It just felt very, very similar to that. Troy also tells her that he wants to take Padre from her. So we didn't see Padre in this episode, but that is the community that she is from and has been building. So he's looking for it. He wants to take it down or bulldoze it, basically. During this part, Strand does finally tell the truth about his name, that he is Victor Strand. But things don't go so well for Troy, even though he's threatening to kill Victor at the time, because the rest of the group, Daniel, June, Sherry, they all show up and they outnumber Troy and his group. So they manage to rescue Madison and Strand, and Madison tells everybody in the hotel that she will take them back with her to Padre if they want to make that their home. So that was kind of the gist of the episode. Troy also says that he killed Alicia. Now, again, if you haven't watched it and don't know who Alicia is, she is Madison's daughter, and they have actually not seen each other for a long time because they did the death fake out for Madison, and Alicia, doesn't know any better, so she still thinks her mother is dead. Alicia last season had a really interesting arc in which she kind of got bitten and kind of didn't. It really is going to end up being linked to the possible cure theory. So what happened is she did get bitten in the arm and she managed to cut her own arm off, but it's almost like she didn't do it quite soon enough, and the virus kind of got into her blood, but it didn't kill her. So for months, she had a really high fever, the way people do when they get bitten, but it didn't take her out. So it's like they're kind of starting to plant the seeds that someone could survive a bite under the right circumstances. And the last thing we saw of her, she basically separated from the group because she believed she was going to die. And they left her on the shores, and then she woke up without a fever. But it's unclear whether that was real or if it was a dream sequence or if it was meant to symbolically be her death. I mean, they left it very, very vague, and just, kind of left it up to the viewer basically at this point. And part of it was that the actress was leaving the show, but they didn't close the door on her coming back at some point. So in this episode, Troy says that he has killed her, and he does have her mummified arm that she was using. She cut it off after she got bitten, but she basically put it back together so that she would have an arm. And it's a little bit like what Erin uses. She uses it as a weapon, but it doesn't look like Erin's, like at all. Anyway, he had it, and he said that he killed her, but given that he's a villain, I kind of don't think that we can trust what he's saying. He was almost really nonchalant about it. And so I don't feel like Alicia's dead. I don't think that's true. I think she'll show up at some point. But the biggest parallel to me in what they said about Alicia is that Troy specifically said that he did not put her down. He's telling Madison that she is staggering around somewhere as a walker. And that is most definitely a parallel to what Team Family thinks about Beth, that she's still wandering around somewhere as a walker. So, like I said, last season when Alicia was going through this arc with the bite cure thing and, was she going to die? She has a fever. Is she not? She had a lot of parallels to Beth. She had this whole episode in the tower with Strand that was like, it almost reminded me a little bit of Tyrese's death episode in that it was very abstract and it almost felt like a death episode, except that she didn't die. So she just had a lot of parallels to Beth and a lot of really interesting symbolism. And now we have this, that he's saying that she's dead and he didn't put her down, so she's a walker. But again, I don't think she's dead. I think she's going to come back. And that, again, will be a really, really heavy parallel to Beth. So that's pretty much what I have for this episode. Again, it's just the sequences. Of course, there's lots of background symbols and colors. Let me see if my fellow theorists, I think they came up with a few more. Oh, the floor. W.D. Way noticed that the floor, where it's like a ballroom in the hotel where, when Troy comes back, that scene is made of yellow and white diamonds. We know diamonds are a Beth symbol, and then the yellow as well. What else have we got? Like I said, there's maps, there's paintings, but there's the fact that Strand also had a dove, which is also a biblical symbol. So there was lots of little things like that, but nothing that made me really, really super excited. It's just a lot of the same symbolism that we often see. But it's mostly the sequences that I get kind of excited about because there are parallels there, and I'm not sure if Beth is going to show up in Fear the Walking Dead. It's possible. We've talked about it before. I'm not like really holding my breath about it, but if she did, obviously I would be super okay with that. So I did notice that the episode ended by somebody saying, "What are you even fighting for?" And then it cut off. So that was kind of an interesting ending. And we'll just kind of have to see where it picks up next week. But obviously, Troy being back is a big deal. Madison being back is a big deal. A lot of reunions between her and Victor, for one thing. Callbacks to the prison. And then parallels between Beth and Alicia again. So like I said, it's not anything near as big as what we usually get or got in Daryl Dixon, but still worth considering and still kind of fun to watch. And I have been watching the series from the beginning, so even though I don't like it as much as the flagship show or, of course, the Daryl Dixon spinoff, I still enjoy these characters. And I'm hoping some of them will make it through the end of the season and maybe end up going back to Alexandria as well and staying, hanging around in the TWD universe, because it would be fun if they did. So, yep, that's all I have. The rest of the week, I'm going to be doing more Ask videos because I still have a lot of asks. So I will be putting those up. And yeah, I hope everybody who watched it enjoyed it, and I will be back tomorrow. Bye.